Welcome to Voices of Adoption, where we share the unique perspective, actionable advice, and meaningful stories of birth parents, adoptees, adoptive families, and other members of the adoption community. I'm Donna Pope, your host, and I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to Voices of Adoption. We are so excited to be here with Craig Hyman. And Craig, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Donna. I am very happy to be here as well. It's a pleasure to talk adoption with you today.
Well, likewise. And so let me tell a little bit about Craig. First of all, he is an adoption life coach. He's an educator and a healing facilitator, and he's been doing it for about 35 years. He's an adoptee in reunion with his biological family since 1987, and we're super excited to hear about that story. He's the creator and facilitator of Inside Out, the Expressive Arts Adoption Healing Seminar. And we're going to have him be sure to include that because he's getting that going again. He founded and facilitated post-reunion support groups in New York City and Los Angeles. He ran an all-male adoptive global virtual support group for 12 years. He specializes in adoption issues, search and reunion, and post-reunion complexities. He works with adoptees, biological families, foster parents, adoptive parents, and their families. He's mentored by the renowned adoption expert, and I'm happy to hear about this person, B.J. Lifton, until her passing. He currently facilitates monthly support groups in Los Angeles for all members of the adoption constellation. He provides coaching and education globally and works as an artist manager, concert promoter, and consultant in the music industry. He's got a lot going. And so, Craig, let's just start out by you telling us your story. Tell us your story.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to spell my name for you. So I like to use my middle initial. It's Craig S. Hyman, Craig Stewart Hyman. And my email address is craigshyman@gmail.com. And my Facebook page for the Inside Out Expressive Arts Adoption Healing Seminar is www.facebook.com/insideoutadoption/.
Okay, Craig, tell us your story. Just tell us about your whole adoption story, what you remember, how you got to know your biological family, how you feel about being an adoptee, anything you'd like to share.
Okay, well, I have answers to all those questions. Those are all broads. Maybe we take them one at a time. So I'll start out by so my story goes. My biological parents were childhood high school sweethearts, and when they were 17, they got pregnant, and this is in Patchogue, Long Island, in 1958, and they separated them, and my biological mother was sent to an unwed mother's wing of a hospital, Booth Memorial Hospital in Queens, where I was born. And I was with her for 3 weeks, and she did not want to give me up, so she refused to sign the papers. So I wound up in foster care for about 10 months. Foster care scenario is a black hole. I tried for years to locate that home, that foster mom, and it was no luck. And then I was adopted at 11 months old by my adoptive parents, and we lived in Bayonne, New Jersey, spitting distance from Manhattan, New York City, and then we moved out to the suburbs when I was in 1969. I have, my mother miscarried many, many, many times, like 16 times. And then once my feeling is that it's all, it's very psychological, and the psychological pressure puts the pressure on the physical and sort of keeps things from happening, from getting pregnant. So once the adoption was secure with me, she was already pregnant and then had my brother, 14 months apart, and then 7 years later had my sister. So I was raised in a very typical middle-class northeastern, slightly neurotic Jewish household. A lot of love around, a lot of family around, because my grandmother lived upstairs with my grandfather and uncle, and she had six sisters and a brother, so there were like every Sunday 30 people in the house, which was great. I was on a street with lots of kids, every house, and we would play ball, and yeah, life was good. My adoptive mother was angelic. She really was the center of my universe and the kindest, most supportive, nurturing mom I could ask for. Now I got in trouble a lot, so I got yelled at a lot. But other than that, she was wonderful. My father was an extreme narcissist, psychologically abusive, and not a real good dad or husband. So I got a 1 out of 2. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. It's good that you had one.
very, very. They're all passed away now. My brother and sister are still alive.
And what's your relationship like with them?
It's been on and off. I mean, it was very strong when we were young. I was very protective of my little sister and my brother. I needed connection more. I needed, and he was very much like he liked to be isolate and be quiet and do his own thing. So we were very different that way. But to this day, I love him very much, and I would say we're very different, except where our sense of humor and our love for like TV, film, music is concerned. Um, at this moment in time, unfortunately, we're not speaking, and that has a lot to do with his domestic situation. It kind of happens every 5 to 10 years, so I'm kind of done chasing it.
So, did you always know from the time you were little that you were adopted?
So it's very interesting, this question. So I'm a strong believer in pre and perinatal psychology. There's a great book called Babies Remember Birth by a Dr. Chamberlain. And I believe that I have memories from the womb. And some of that has actually been confirmed by my biological mother right after I met her. Uncanny memories and recall, I don't know where they came from. And the adoptive side, remember there's an 11-month gap, a void, which I don't know really what happened. I mean, I kind of do know what happened, but for all intents and purposes, I'm just going to say I don't know. So I was adopted into my household, my adopted parents at 11 months. They, through Spence Chapin Agency, and there was a set of books called The Chosen Baby Story, which B.J. Lifton has actually revised. She was asked to revise, I think, pretty soon, like not long before she passed away. Anyway, this was, I think, some good advice that the agency gave them. So they would sit me down almost every Saturday and try to explain to me what adoption was and how they got me, and show me these sort of picture book stories. And I remember having my first of 2 out-of-body experiences. I left myself. So what happened, I believe, somewhere, and I don't know all the psychology of it, but somewhere, something, when I was able to comprehend what happened, something in me already knew that.
Mm.
And I think it connected it and it triggered it. And at 3 years old, you have a very small set for which to draw from and to express yourself by. But I remember leaving myself. And I can tell you the bedspread. We were sitting on my parents' bed, the bedspread where my parents were, where I was, what the floor was like, and the dresser. And I was looking down on myself and my parents. And then I remember eventually came back into myself. But that was the day and the moment I discovered my anger. And I was really angry. I I didn't really necessarily know why. I was 3 years old. But I remember pushing the books away, not wanting to hear about it, and just being like, you know, us adoptees, we get these feelings that we just feel like we're going to die. I feel annihilation, and it comes up often in different ways, triggered by different things. And it really, we're trauma survivors. It really feels like we're going to die. We're going to implode, explode, whatever. And that's my first memory.
That is so interesting. I mean, you'll hear about these out of body experiences, but they're usually related to near death experiences is what they're related to. And here you have this experience because you consciously become aware that someone in your feelings rejected and gave you away.
Yes, but it's much more heavy and deeper and complex than just somebody. It was.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I was learning, or had learned by 3 years old, what mother and mom and mommy means. And I identified that person who was sitting in front of me as that. So to think that I already had another one, I mean, I can't really honestly tell you what was going through my head. I'm going to guess some kind of betrayal, some kind of, how could somebody do this to me? Like, what the hell's going on? Please help me, somebody. I was too young to medicate, so it was like, how do I deal with this? It's like I'm going to annihilate. That's what it felt like.
How interesting. That's an interesting word, annihilate. How would you recommend that adoptive parents help their adopted child deal with the sense of betrayal that they may feel when learning that they were adopted?
Well, I think first and foremost, never deny their reality. Because what they're feeling is not only, especially even if they're young, it doesn't matter. Because we have a tendency to, young children, they're just kids. What do they know? Well, they know a lot, because they have cellular memory and they have subconscious memory. And in some cases, I believe, womb memory.
Do you think your parents were able to do that?
My father, not at all. I mean, he couldn't even talk about his own stuff. And he had more than, anyone I've ever met. My mother did. Now, a lot of adopted parents have a great sense of, like my mom did, great sense of guilt, responsibility. This kid's got to be okay. This kid's got to be happy, and based on what my mother knew, what she read, what Spence Chapin told her, which is very little. We can get into that later. But she tried to help. However, she was not educated in the way, nor was anyone then, and most people still aren't, in the way of like focusing on, or let me rephrase that, being educated about what the child potentially went through before they came into the adoptive parent's life and world. And if you only know so much, that's your set. That, in addition to your observation of your child and maybe hearsay or an article or another parent who had an adopted child, what did they learn that maybe they shared? So the ability was very limited. Now, the intention was there. The love, the commitment was there, but the knowledge was limited. There's a lot more education needs to go along with it so that the adoptive parents know more, have more tools, and know how to handle what comes out of the child's mouth. What is the reaction? Does that make sense?
Totally, but now I want to hear what that education should be.
I knew that was coming. Well, the most important thing is that adoptive parents understand that you don't just adopt a child Child needs a home, needs a parent. The parent,
And they're a tabula rasa. They are a clean slate.
it's not just a live happily ever after. It's, you know, they're going to be usually adoptive parents reacting to the things the child does and taking them at face value. And what could be causing this? Is this a problem in school? Are they being bullied? And the reality is, and those things are possible, but I'm not saying I'm for or against adoption. I have four perspectives on this, but it happens. And I'll quote B.J. Lifton. You know, there are always going to be kids who need parents, and there are always going to be parents who'd be wonderful to for their kids. So I'm not necessarily against that. It's just I'm against that, like the lack of education that exists in society about what it's like to be adopted and what that means and what that feels like, and the complexities, really the complexities more than anything. And I think that the agencies would really do a real service to society, the child and the adopted parents, if they educate the parents, about what the child would have experienced. You know, like read The Primal Wound, read Lost and Found, share it with the parents, you know. Then if they were able to do some more research, which I don't really think the agencies, not when I was adopted, were that thorough. I mean, there was a one sheet, you know, what are your interests? What are your biological parents' interests? They like to play the piano. What religion? You know, what are their hobbies? You know, that's like unidentifying information required by law. That's only going to get you so far. If you know that something about the household or the scenario the child was born into, this, that, and the other thing, that's information. And that could be, you know, for lack of a better word, I'll use rather than ammunition, tools to really help sort of move this along in a better, more educated way. Because again, adoptive parents are mostly responding to what the child says or complains about based on what the adopted parent knows. If the adoptive parent doesn't know anything about adoption or primal wound or what happened in foster care for 10 months or even what that was about, then they're addressing the Band-Aid. They're addressing the symptom, not the problem. Am I getting a little too long-winded with this answer?
No, I'm thinking, and I'm thinking about my son. So my son came to me when he was 2. And when his birth mom brought him to me, she said, you need to get a tent for him to sleep in. And I said, oh, okay. And so I went out and bought one of those toy tents. And when she came, she said, oh, that's not going to do. And she said, and so we went down to a camping goods store and we got a tent, kind of a pup tent that he could zip up. And he could not sleep unless he was zipped up in that tent. What does that tell me as an adoptive mom? There's 2 years of stuff there that I don't know and I don't understand. So you're saying as adoptive parents, we need to kind of know whatever we can figure out about this child. Now, even if they're not 2 years old, maybe they're 10 months old, maybe they're freshly born.
It's not so much of what you can figure out. That's part of it, unfortunately.
For sure.
It's what the agency has a responsibility, or in your case, I guess it was private. So any information that can be documented that you can use as a sort of guiding, you know, piece of literature on how to respond and react to what the child is presenting to you. The more information you have. So this tent thing, right?
Right.
It's interesting because if you ask me, it's one of two things. It's a recreation of the womb and the warmth of that. And I know most of my life I've been doing things where I recreate the womb. I used to have this theory. A lot of my male adoptee friends used to laugh at me, but it was a return to the womb theory. and that we would create our physical world as much as possible that was as safe and warm and protected as the womb. So it could be that. But then here's an example. When I was a child and I wouldn't sleep, my parents would put me in the car and they'd just drive me around the block and I would pass right out. Now, why, I couldn't tell you. But that's something, that's kind of like the tent.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what you're implying is that these adoptees bring with them genetics, experiences, anything, all of this stuff with them, even if they're newborns, that they bring, and being aware of as much as you can about what they're bringing would be helpful.
Yes, and if it's a private adoption, I don't know, there should be some kind of law where a certain amount of information is required if possible. I don't know how to handle that one, but certainly if you're meeting the biological parent in the handoff, for lack of a better word, then they will have some information and they should be required to give it to you.
For sure.
The agency, on the other hand, should be required to research and find out as much of what the child went through as possible. Now, there are a number of things I know for fact through very, very deep therapy that took place and happened to me while I was in foster care. I'm not going to get into them today, but I didn't figure that out until I was in my 40s. And, it explains a lot of things. But I think that would be helpful information for the child's well-being as they grow, and certainly the adoptive parents.
Yeah. So with the more openness in adoption, and now we're kind of leading into you getting to know your biological family, which will one of the arguments could be made, if you can't get that information from the agency about genetics or about interests or any of those things, well, have a more open adoption so that you as an adoptee can get it directly from the biological family themselves. So that would be kind of an argument for that. How did you get to know your biological family? Tell us that story.
6 months before I started searching, which I didn't even know there was such a thing, I was standing around with a very close friend of mine and a guy that worked for him who was also adopted. And we were talking about being adopted and would we ever want to know our parents. And we were both like, no, I would never want to know. This is the luck of the draw. These are the cards I was dealt. It never even crossed my mind consciously. Subconsciously, I certainly believe every adoptee wants to know. I don't know how you could not. And if you don't, it's just because you're consumed with guilt or fear or what have you. So I wrote the agency and I wrote them a letter and I said, just basically I'd like to come in and meet you. And I did. And I kind of realized right off the bat that they were the enemy.
Well, that's good.
They had me talk for about an hour and a half, and I feel very certain they recorded me because when I had phone conversations with them later, they were sort of quoting me. And that was, by the time I was out of there, I primarily wanted to search because I wanted medical information. I didn't have anything, and I had severe allergies that I suffered with and things like that. And they're basically, they're like, well, take this. It was April 1st. They said, take the summer, think about it, and when the summer's over, because I wasn't really sure I wanted to search. I just thought I'd go in and they'd give me medical information, and I'd be on my merry way. Well, that didn't happen. And by the time I left, I said to my friend who was waiting in the lobby, who was there to support me, I said, screw these people. They don't give a crap about me. I'm going to go do the search on my own. And I did call them back at the end of the summer, and they were just full of really denial and trying to talk me out of it. So,
trying to talk you out of searching or trying to talk you out of knowing who your biological family was?
Trying to talk me out of searching and trying many, many different ways to tell me they can't help me without saying, it's bad for business. We're not going to help you. um, this is I can't tell you how many years ago. This is like
Well,
30
if
years.
you would have been 25, so 25 plus,
I'm 66.
yeah.
So I'm really reaching, but that was the general gist of it. What was interesting, you'll like this. So, I don't know what, in New York State, this is in New York City, there's the law is they're required to give you unidentifying information. I don't know what the law is now. And they basically, first they interviewed me, they let me talk. And they said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm ready." And the first thing they said, "Your birth mother like liked to sing and play piano." And I started crying. So my whole life is built around music. My
And
everybody.
it was at that time too.
It,
At that time.
I used to sit at the living room window, play records, and sing out the window. I figured out years later I was singing for the hope that she would hear me and come back and get me.
Mm.
So by the time I was 5, all the records on the record player in the house was in my room, and it's never changed. I work in the industry. Everybody on my birth mother's side of the family, except for one cousin, is a composer, was a jazz singer, was a radio DJ, owns a jazz club, and it's just in my blood. So once they told me that, I started crying, and they said, "Did we hit something?" I said, "Yeah, just give me a second, And then she said, "We're going to go through it again." So then she went through everything, and that was, to describe my grandfather, her father, my paternal biological grandparents, and my birth father. It wasn't much, like religion, hobbies. Sometimes when I get talking, it's
No, it's great. So I'm curious because when you first went in there, they didn't want to tell you anything. So what changed so that now they're telling you all these things?
so subconsciously I probably wanted to search. Consciously, I just wanted more information about me, and I was entitled to it, and they're the only ones I knew who might know it. And I wanted medical. I wanted to know what these allergies, because I suffered so terribly, were about. And they refused to tell me anything about me. And what they told me about my biological parents was very little.
So you just kind of kept pushing at it. So two questions that come up for me with this. Why do you think that meant so much to you?
Well, what happened was I woke up one morning and things in life were not going that well. And I was, I guess, 26. Just having a bad patch on like every level. And I looked in the mirror and somehow there was this knowingness. It was almost like my subconscious spoke to me and said, "You need to know who you are and where you came from. And somehow this will give you these answers to what the hell's going on right now." And that's how it all started.
Well, why it meant so much to you?
Well, it didn't mean so much to me at the time, at least consciously. I didn't remember 6 months the previous. I was saying, "No, these are the parents I got, and that's all there is to it. End of story." But what I was doing was I was looking for myself because I didn't know myself. Sure, I knew I liked music. I knew I liked all these different things. I knew my hobbies, my interests, but I had no sense of who I was. And this is where I go back to B.J. Lifton. You may have read, she's got a term that she created called genealogical bewilderment, where so children, when they're raised by one of their biological or both biological parents, or at least a relative that somehow looks like them, they're mirrored back to themselves. So their sense of self builds, and there's more of a foundation and more of a sense of they know who the hell they are. When you don't have that, it doesn't matter. All the love in the world is not going to help and fix it. You don't know who the hell you are. So you know very little about, sure, I would bet you $1 million. I knew I loved music. I knew I loved running. I knew the things I loved, about myself or life, but I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I looked like. I had the terms of a sense of me, like really how we know who we are and sort of our roots. We don't have any clue, adoptees.
It's so interesting because this search for our biological parents is really a search for ourselves.
It's both.
Right.
I mean, my search took me 11 months. The average back then was 10 months. This is pre-internet. And so I went to all the, I started out going to groups, first birth mother groups in Long Island, because I knew she was somewhere, Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island. I just stand up and give my name and my birth date. I didn't even know the hospital I was born in at first. Spence Chapin, sound familiar? Anybody else give up a child? And one person would say, yeah, I did. And one thing would lead to another. Then I found the hospital. I lied to them. I had a fake, these documents and get copies of my feeding records. And on it was my birth mother's name. And then I went to it's not there anymore because I was there a couple of weeks ago. They don't keep them there anymore. But I was able to, all the births in New York City are listed in the genealogical books and of the 5 boroughs. And there's a lot of births. It's a big city. And I found my biological name there in the book, which then there were 12 Harriets born that could have been her year, my birth mom, in New York, in Brooklyn. And I was able to put that together. And then I had a name to trace, and it was, but I'm off track. So most important thing was to see my face in somebody else's, even if it was once. So I was trained by, I don't know if you remember who or know who Florence Fisher was. She created ALMA, Adoptees Liberty Movement of America, a very militant elder adoptee that trained you like you were in the army in terms of the search, and it doesn't matter who or what anyone else wants or thinks. We are entitled to one meeting. We are entitled to know who we are. Nobody asked us if we wanted to be adopted.
So you figured out their name, and then you reached out to them?
It was not so simple. My biological mother was in hiding because she's been married like 7 or 8 times. She was in like her 4th marriage, and she was physically abused. So she was in hiding from the husband, living with my half sister, who, by the way, I was recently reunited with. I haven't seen her in 41 years. About 3 or 4 weeks ago in New York, we had lunch. So I couldn't track my birth mother anymore. I started tracking my half sister. I went to the place she lived in. She had moved out the day before. I went to her job. She had just left. It was a car dealership in the Miracle Mile in Long Island, Roslyn. It's like a mall for like a mile. And it was like Labor Day weekend. And just as I'm pulling out, the lady who was the manager came running out and said, "Stop, stop, stop. Your sister Lisa's on the phone and wants to talk to you."
Wow.
So I went inside and she says, "Who is this?" She started screaming at me. I mean, she had a lot of anger. She's like, "Who the hell are you? I don't have a cousin Craig. What do you want?" She thought I was somebody from my birth mother's husband who she was hiding from, trying to hurt them. And I was like, "Think fast, Craig, think fast." I said, "Do you want to speak?" I figured if she talked to another woman, she might calm down. So I said, "Do you want to talk to my sister?" The birth mother, Carol. And Carol got on the phone, and, she got emotional fast. And she started crying. And then my birth mother got on the phone, and Carol just melted down, and my birth mother figured out what was going on. And I had my head up to the phone. I could hear this blood-curdling scream. She goes, "Oh my God, it's my son." And she hands me the phone. She goes, "Are you my son?" And she said, "Yeah." And she asked me like a whole series of questions. And I had to answer every one of them, except one. Like, "What's your birth father's name?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, I put it on the papers at the agency." I said, "They didn't tell me, and they didn't give me anything." So long story short, I went. She goes, "You go wait in front of the mall across the street, and we'll be there in 2 hours. We're going to drive by." She said, "If it's not you, I'm going to keep going." I said, "Do you want to know what I look like?" And she described me to a T. So we met. I saw my face in someone else's the first time in my life, and I was never higher, with or without the use of other substances in my life. And my half sister and Carol stayed behind, and we just walked for an hour. And then I went back to their house. I spent the night in the spare room. We talked all night. There's a lot more there, but I was starting to learn who I was and see my face in someone else's, meet my sister. I learned about my half brother who had taken his life. I never met. The next day, we called my birth mother and my birth father's sisters had like a tea group, tea club. Like it was like the 50s. They had like these little girls' clubs. And that's where she hooked up with my birth father. He was living in the house. And the next day we called my aunt, who was one of the girls in the tea club. And they hadn't spoken, her and my birth mother, in like 24 years. And she said, "Harriet," she says, "Oh my God, how are you? How have you been?" She was, "Good, how are you?" And my aunt immediately said, "How's my nephew?" Meaning me. And she says, "How did you know?" She says, "I've been waiting for this phone call for 27 years. And I got on the phone and talked to her, and she said, I raised all my kids to know about you and that someday you'd show up." And that's the beginning of it all.
It's a beautiful story. And what it leads to is that yearning, that deep yearning to know, just to know who you are, to know who they are, to understand the reasons behind that.
That was mine. I was entitled. I never felt entitled. I always felt like there was something wrong with me and I wasn't worthy.
So how your mom she screamed when she realized it was you.
It was a blood-curdling, deep scream. It was from the womb, if I may.
So what do you think is behind that?
Well, years of loss and pain and wondering, and not the primal wound, of course, but another side of that deep, deep wound and longing.
Mm-hmm. So you said that there was a lot of mixed reactions and a lot of good and bad, but in general, how do you think you and your mom did once you got
My
together?
biological mother, unfortunately, not very well. We'd have meetings set up and she would not show up. And then one day I got a phone call. She was in hiding, being hid by these two best friends. And one day I got a call from the wife, and they had met me. We went out to eat like the night after I met her. And she'd run off with her husband. And it was just an ongoing series of this kind of stuff. And, I was elated nonstop. But I tried for 8 years to have some kind of friendship or relationship or something with her. And she just wasn't capable. Her half sister, my aunt, I clicked with right away. And I'm really close to her and her 3 kids to this day. Just a few weeks ago, she just passed away, less than a year ago, and I I was having lunch with my half sister. We share the same mother, and she told me a lot of things. She'd gone through a metamorphosis. She told me a lot of things that I never knew about my half brother and about my birth mother. She played her last voicemail message for me. She gave me a copy of her death certificate, which I still am not sure why. And I went out to the cemetery to visit her gravesite and have a conversation with her. So it didn't go great.
It didn't go great, but do you regret the search?
No.
Why?
I'd do it all over again.
Because
I had to find out what was on the other end, and I had to find out what I looked like and who this was in here and why. I mean, I'm a strong believer, and I know this for fact, having met thousands of adoptees and being one myself. Yes, it's a search for, your roots, and it's a search for, like you said it earlier, for yourself.
So, I mean, we don't want to tell anybody what they have to do.
No.
Because there's some adoptees that say, I don't care. I don't want to know. I simply don't want to know.
Well, I was one of them.
Right. And it changed because you started needing answers because you were going through a tough time and you needed some answers. And so at that point, then you go through it. But we don't want to tell anybody when or how or where.
No, it's an individual and personal experience that an adoptee or a birth parent gets to choose on their own. And they shouldn't be ostracized for doing it or not doing it. If they need support, then there should be support out there for them in either decision.
Right. You mentioned that you have a superpower.
Yeah, I was looking at that. I don't remember saying.
I remember saying that. Well, I'm going to make it your superpower, whether you mentioned it or not. That every adoptee, and this is kind of the rule, that there is trauma in every adoptee, and there's trauma in every adoption, and many people would say, well, then we shouldn't be doing it. We shouldn't be placing children for adoption. We shouldn't be doing it. Do you agree with that?
Well, here's my position on adoption. There will always be children who need parents, and there will always be parents who will be good parents to children. And in that case, I certainly support it. Now, I can also be a contradiction right now in this conversation because I said to you, well, I'm not really wholeheartedly in support of adoption. However, I can tell you, and if you learn more about my story and the things I've been through, even though I grew up in a really dysfunctional family and my father was horrible, my mother was wonderful, adoption saved my life. I have my issues and they're never going to go away. I just, I don't know if you know who Ram Dass is, but I'm quite a big follower of Ram Dass, and I knew him for a while when he was alive. And the way he would talk about his problems, the people would ask him, hey, so now that you're super awakened and do all this meditation and write all these books and we're a PhD professor in psychology in Harvard, are you now rid of your problems? He said, no, they'd never go away. He goes, now I just know what to do with them. He said, when they knock at the door, I said, oh, come on in, have a seat. Let's talk. How have you been? What's going on? And they tend to go away more quickly. But that's sort of my belief system. My set of stuff, my baggage, my issues. I mean, I'm also, besides being adopted and a foster child, I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the personality trait. So it really magnifies everything that's good and bad. So it has not been easy, and sometimes it's still not easy. But my adoptive mother is the center of my universe. She's with me at this moment. And if it wasn't for her, I'd be dead. And even though there's a lot of complications in our relationship, and I have a lot of things that are not so positive to say about my birth mother. And because of her, I got stuck in foster care for 10 months. So that's 3 mothers in 11 months. It's a lot of work. It's in therapy. She finally found a way to give me up, which did save me. So my answers regarding my belief in adoption or not are they're not black and white. They're not absolute. And there I have, I think I maybe listed 2 or 3. I have I can't remember the other one. The other one is actually spiritual. So I have 4 not concepts, 4 whatever beliefs about how this all works. I'm of the belief that I believe in reincarnation, and I believe we're all souls, and that we're put on this earth to learn lessons. And I believe once we learn everything we need to know as a soul, we get to graduate and not come back anymore. And I also believe that we choose. So when we're in between the physical, we choose the next world, family, parents that raise us. If you tell me that, Craig, you chose your father to raise you, I would say, well, you're nuts. He's a narcissist. He's Donald Trump. But good or bad, for some reason, I had to learn something, and I don't like it, but I believe it. So there's a lot going on. You can see I've been thinking about this for a little while.
For sure. In fact, tell us about Inside Out Expressive Art Adoption Healing Seminar, because this inside out thinking that you've been doing, you've made it into a seminar.
Yeah, this is about 15 years ago or more. So I've been going to therapy since I was 9. And then when I found my birth mother, I was going from one therapist to another and paying them. And they had no idea what I was talking about. And then a birth mother friend of mine, was either Myra Ribbon or Joyce Barr, introduced me to BJ. And I knew who she was because I was reading her books. So BJ gave me 10 therapy sessions in her apartment in New York. And by the 10th session, she then placed me with a therapist in New York who I was with, who was perfect for me. I was with her for 4 or 5 years or something. And then some years later, I moved to the Bay Area. And I went to I was considering other careers. I had an interest in art therapy. So I went to a demonstration of a particular art therapy process in Berkeley. And there was only 3 people there. So they gave us all these one-on-one mini sessions to see what it was like. And I had this unbelievable, I wouldn't say it was a breakthrough. It was more like it tapped into all this primal wound stuff. So I went twice a week for an hour and a half for 5 years. It was a spiritually based art therapy process. And in that process, so we would draw or paint or whatever I wanted to do. And then what's happening when you're creating is you're drawing on the subconscious. We could be saying we're painting a mountain, but something else back there is running the show. And then what we would do is we'd quarter it, and I would pick a spot, pick a quarter, and then I'd close my eyes and I'd go into it and sort of meditate on it and see what happens. And she would guide me. Sometimes I write about it afterwards. But I mean, having been in like every type of therapeutic practice for 50 years now or more, 55, that was the most effective.
Interesting.
And I had the most growth and healing and breakthrough from it. And I also was able to not only, I was able to go down so deep and meet my primal wound. My primal wound was a sad little tadpole of a boy living in a dark, cold cave, all alone. I remember it like it's a cartoon that I used to watch every day when I was 5 years old. So what happened was, having done all these therapies, I decided, to, well, first off, I started giving male adoptee workshops for the AAC, and I did that for 12 years. It grew from one session to 3 sessions. It was male adoptee issues 1, open to everybody, spiritual perspectives in adoption, how you've grown spiritually as a result of this, wound occurrence. And then the third part was men only, doors closed. We talked for 4 or 5 hours every year, and then we'd keep it going every month on conference calls pre Zoom. So then, and I had, after years of doing therapy, and I felt like I wasn't really going to grow anymore, there was a lady named Jane Nast, who was the president of the AAC, who I knew. And I said, listen, it's time for me to give back. It's time for me to do service. People have been there for me. And now it's my turn to help others, educate the public, birth parents, adoptive parents, help other adoptees. She introduced me to a guy named Doug Henderson in Wisconsin. He's written many books. He's a PhD in psychology. He's retired now. Survived cancer, alcoholism, you name it. We did the workshop together, and he retired like 2 years later, so I took it over. And then eventually I realized there was a need for more. So what I did was I took everything that worked the best for me in therapy, and I put it together in a sequential kind of a growth escalation in an 8-hour intensive day with a half-hour lunch break. And I thought it would be pretty good. It turned out it was great. And a lot of people were saying to me, I got more out of that one day than like 3 years in therapy. So I took it around the country for a few years, and I couldn't keep up the promotional end of it, and finding new places to present it. And my work got so all-consuming, I let it go. But now I'm ready to start doing it again. And some people have been asking me to do an online course, which I'm probably going to do. So mostly the seminar is based on things that changed my life through the expressive arts therapy process. Other things here and there I took from BJ, I took from other therapists. So there's all kinds of things. There's art therapy, there's writing, there's role play. I'm very proud of it, and I'm so happy to be able to help others, especially adoptees. So yeah, it's time to pull it out of the closet and dust off the cobwebs. And
Well, then that kind of leads us sort of to our last little push. And that is for those listening to this podcast, for those relating to some of the struggles that you've gone through, you've got a program that can help them. Tell us a little bit more about it. And when do you think you'll actually dust it off and have it available?
I'm not sure. I'm guessing it would be next, starting maybe this coming winter or spring. TBD. I'm sort of trying to put that together and balance it out with other work projects in life right now. I work for myself, so I create my own time and calendar. So, yeah.
Well, those who have subscribed, we will certainly put it out there. You let us know.
Thank
and
you.
We'll put it out when it comes out.
I encourage anyone who's interested to email me, contact me, and I can give them more information. And if they want to host, and typically the people who host it are anything from adoption agencies, churches, spiritual retreat centers, such, or just a support group of adoptees, birth parents, what have you. It's open to all members of the adoption constellation, and it seems to work for everybody in that triad.
So, Craig, this has been a wonderful visit. It's been just so good to hear who you really are. It's been a wonderful visit. In conclusion, do you have any final advice or thoughts that you'd want to share with people listening to your story?
I think one thing, and thank you, Donna, it's been equally as wonderful and rewarding for me to talk to you and to know that there are people out there like you who care and are interested and want to help spread the word. I think one thing I'd like to say is maybe address the adoptees. Things can get hard for us. Life can be very, very hard and very painful. We have a unique, complex, difficult set of stuff. My message is that you can get through it, even when it seems the darkest. But I think it's most important that you find support system. You find other adoptees. You find other birth parents. You can't get through it alone. I mean, you really need support. I mean, that's why I had the men's group for 12 years. It was like, finally, I'm not alone in this. And it makes a difference. When you know there's someone else out there to talk to, or someone else who cares, will help, gives you hope, don't give up. Don't cash in your chips, even when you think you want to. Reach out.
What's been surprising to me, and I've only been doing this for not very long, is how many adoptees we've talked with, and the struggles that they're facing, and many of the stories there we do see. I'm already seeing the patterns, and one of those patterns is what you addressed, and that's how important it is that they see a face like their own, that they see somebody that they can relate to. I did not know, not being an adoptee myself, I did not know how important that is. But it seems to be an innate need to feel I'm connected to this person in just how they look. So thank you for sharing this. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, Donna. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Adoption. I'm Donna Pope. Every voice in the adoption triad deserves to be heard and understood. Visit voicesofadoption.org to subscribe and access our additional resources. And join us next time as we continue to build bridges through conversation.